What's going on, everybody? Hadn't done a video in a while because we've been a little bit busy, especially coming to the end of our meat chicken season, our broiler season. So we actually wanted to step y'all through how we process here at Refuge Farm. We have a few birds left and then we're totally done for the season, but we want to step y'all through the process, talk you through it, kind of point out some differences and advantages to processing on farm and how that's different from regular mainstream grocery store chickens. But we're going to walk through how to do it. We may cut in and out of some of the spots because you may have some weak stomachs who don't like to see the actual process of making a live chicken your food. But to hold on to tradition, especially on processing day, I wear Crocs because sometimes things can get a little bit wet. Bathing suit, and almost all the time I wear my American flag shirt because there's nothing more American than raising and processing and eating your own food. That's what freedom is, right?
That's right.
Go America. All right, so I'm gonna pass this off to Emily and we'll talk through a couple things. All right. All right, so the first thing I'm gonna do is grab a couple of our chickens. And there's kind of there's a way I do this, whether you know it or not. Holding a chicken upside down. Oh, he just pooped on me a little bit. It's okay, that's why I wear a bathing suit. Holding them by the feet and holding them upside down actually makes them calmer and easier to handle. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here in the cone. I'm going to put them down head first, okay? And especially with these, sometimes it's hard to get their body all the way down. Put their head down through the cone here, and what you're going to do, we process and we slaughter chickens a specific way. The first thing that we do is we do slaughter them by bleeding, which is most state laws everywhere. But what we do is we put just one quick cut right behind where their ear would be, because that's where their main artery is. So they don't feel anything. They get one quick cut here and then they just bleed out, and they're usually dead within the first 30 seconds. Okay, because what it does, that bleeding makes them lose consciousness and then they eventually die. Okay, so it's really quick, really painless, especially for maybe our Jewish friends. This would be the equivalent of a typical halal kill, a kosher kill, how they've been doing this, processing animals for thousands and thousands of years. So this is quick, humane, and the reason why we do it this way too is some of you may have grown up with your grandma, with a hatchet, cutting the heads off the chickens in your backyard. The reason why we just slit and cut this artery open is because if you cut the chicken's head off, it shuts their central nervous system down and it doesn't pump the blood out of the body. So just by cutting this, their central nervous system still being intact, that allows their heart to continue to pump the blood out of the body, which produces better meat. Because even sometimes if you go to the grocery store, you can find meat that still has a lot of blood mixed into the meat, and you can even still see like coagulated blood in the veins in chickens and things like that. So by killing this way, we allow the blood to totally get out of the body. So out of respect for some of y'all who may not want to see this, we'll go ahead and cut it here and pick it up right after. All right, so we've got our first two birds down, and with our setup right now, especially with the plucker that we have, we do 2 birds at a time, just because that's about what the plucker will hold and do a good job. So we process 2 birds at a time, going through the process. But one thing I also wanted to mention too is that this is kind of the hardest part for us, especially since we love doing what we're doing so much, and we give our animals the best care that they can possibly have. So processing day is kind of bittersweet. It's great to kind of come through to the end of this cycle, but killing's definitely not our favorite part. And usually we have me, my dad, and sometimes another person out here, and it's definitely our least favorite thing. That's why we do it the quickest, most humane way possible. But you know, it's part of who we are, that caring for them and respecting them in the way that we give them life, but also respecting them in the way that we end their life, and for them to complete their purpose is something that we definitely reflect on and realize every time we process chickens, because ultimately, especially, you know, based off of our beliefs, that in order for there to be life, an abundant life and a great life, death is also part of that equation. So even for us, just connecting those dots makes us very thankful for us to be able to be a part of this process of life. And not to get too silly, but just like the Lion King says, it's a circle of life. All right, so what we're gonna do now is we're gonna what's called scalding them. And this is where we dip the birds, and Emily can get a shot of it here. We have just a little scalding pot. This is, you know, what you would deep fry a turkey in. The water temperature, the optimum temperature is right around 145 degrees. It's hot enough to where it'll loosen the skin up to allow the feathers to come off in the plucker, but it's not hot enough to where it starts actually cooking the bird. So it's kind of a happy medium, and honestly, this has been the hardest part of the process for us, trying to maintain, because if temperatures get too low, then the feathers don't come out as good. And if the temperature's too high, then the skin's too fragile and it gets ripped up in the plucker. So if you're doing this on your own, at your own farm, I bet you will find this to be maybe the most frustrating part. I think next year we're gonna invest and get a better scalder. So one thing we also do, we have the water in the pot, but we mix in a little dish detergent as well, because that allows the feathers to release from those follicles easier, because the soap, the dish detergent, that's part of its job, is to kind of break things apart. That's why it cleans grease off your dishes. So it does the same thing here. So we'll dump them in and out for 90 seconds, both of them evenly, all the way down to the feet, to make sure we get all those feathers in. Dump them in and out for 90 seconds, and then we'll put them into the plucker together. So that's what we'll show you next.
And the temperature needs to be right at 145 to 150 degrees. It's a really pretty small window, but for the reasons that Cam said. So make sure if you're doing this at home, it's no less than 145, no more than 150, because then you'll have problems.
Yeah. All right. These are big birds, so it's hard to, sometimes we try to do two at a time, but sometimes we can only do one.
Okay.
All right, so we think these are ready to go. So what we'll do is we'll put both of them into the plucker. Again, with this one, especially with the size of these birds, 2 in the plucker at a time's about what it needs to be. And we also spray them with cold water while they're turning, because that helps the feathers to release as well.
How'd that do?
All right, we'll run them for just a little bit more. All right, so one of these came out pretty good. That's a pretty good looking naked bird. All right, especially if you've had to hand pluck one of these before, and I have, and it's not fun at all. This plucker obviously makes things a whole lot easier and cleaner and quicker. So this bird is actually good to go. I may clean up a few feathers off of it. Now this other one is didn't quite get all of its feathers out, so I'll have to go through, especially sometimes these pin feathers are the hardest. So there's a few feathers under here that I need to clean up on this one, which is not uncommon, especially for us when we've done it as far as like the first round, the first birds in the tank. Sometimes getting the water temperature correct is the hardest the first time, but then as we kind of get things settled out, then it goes a whole lot quicker. All right, so we'll move on to processing here in just a second. All right, so now we've gone through the scalding, we've gone through the plucking. Now we're actually to the part of cleaning the bird. All right, and we've got one of our other assistants out here, Mary Cameron. She likes to watch. Now with this bird, it was the last one for the day, and it was in there by itself. And sometimes when they're by themselves, they don't pluck very well, but we're actually parting out this bird. So we've just taken a little bit of extra time and plucked the areas that'll be parted out. So first thing we're gonna do is remove the head. Now, since we kill by bleeding, obviously everything's still intact, and another reason why we kill just by that one quick cut is if you were to chop a head off like your grandma or granddad used to do, a lot of times that creates bone fragments that can stay in the meat. So we keep everything intact. So the first step that I do is just pull the head off, okay? And I have a little bucket to the side here that I put stuff in. And then I'll flip the bird over. I'm gonna try not to spray Emily. Although she did spray me. She did spray me a minute ago, so she kind of deserves it.
Payback.
So when cleaning, especially with these joints, you're gonna always cut within the joints. So if you feel the leg, you can feel kind of where the two bones meet in the leg, and you're just gonna make a quick cut there in the middle. And then I spray you too. And then it comes right off. And even though as we clean, we try not to waste many of our parts. And number one, the parts that we can't use, we always compost, but we remove the hearts. We keep the hearts out because we feed those to our dogs. They love them, and they're extremely healthy. Usually it's one of the best parts of the muscle of any animal. We also take out the livers, we save them, we package those up to sell as well, because they're extremely high in iron and extremely healthy for you. But we're even trying to be in communication with some dog food producers, some natural dog food producers that will take even other parts of the chicken as well. All right, so I've removed the head, I removed the legs. The next part I'm going to do is right here on the back. There's an oil sac right on the tail, and I'm going to cut that part off because that would just, if you're cooking it, if you were cooking a whole bird, that would just kind of create a sour taste in the pot. So I cut that oil sac off. Then I move around back to the neck. Now, if you buy whole birds from us, we leave the necks on because honestly, in my opinion, whenever we cook whole birds, I love the neck meat the most. It tastes the best. You obviously have to pick it off with your fingers, otherwise you'll be eating bones. But we leave the necks on. And up here at the front, all I'm gonna do is pull this skin off a little bit, if you can see it. I'm just gonna put a little nick in there, creates a little hole. Then all I'm doing is tearing. There's not a whole lot of cutting that I actually do on the chicken. Now in here, there's a crop, and it is really, really slippery. It's hard to get a hold of. And what we do, we take birds, our chickens, off of feed for at least 12 hours before we process, so this crop will be empty. Otherwise it would be slammed full of crickets, grass. This one has a little speck of grass in it. Feed. Okay, which would, you know, make it harder to grab and clean, and it could contaminate the rest of the meat. So we get all that stuff cleaned out. So once I get that crop detached, I'm gonna kind of hook my finger under it and where the esophagus is. I'm gonna punch my hand through it. You laughing at that noise? So I'm basically detaching this crop and the esophagus. Okay? Now, watch out, Mac. You're gonna get sprayed. It's the spray zone. Then I'm gonna flip around to the back end, and right under its vent, I'm gonna put another little cut there. And this is a really fatty area. And I'm gonna pull and tear the skin here and pull the opening, because I wanna leave as much fat in place as possible, because that's where a lot of the flavor is. And with these pastured chickens, the fat in them is a whole lot healthier for you, better for you.
Yep, a lot more omega-3s.
Okay, then I'm just gonna start eviscerating, pulling everything out. So to start with, the, let's see here. I kind of put my hand in through both sides and kind of loosen everything up and detach all that fattiness around here, so everything can kind of pull out easier. But this gizzard is really easy to pull. It's one of the first things that you feel when you put your hand in there, which if you eat chicken gizzards, God bless your soul.
Let us know. We'll save some for you.
If you want some, we'll save them for you. We will not clean them out though. You'll have to do that yourself. So I get a hold of everything and just kind of pull it all out. Okay, and as I pull everything out, you can see I actually got a hold of the crop, and the esophagus is coming through, and everything is out. I know it looks a little gross. Mac, you about to get sprayed again, baby. So once I pull everything, the insides out, I will take my knife and cut around the vent in the end of the large intestine. Some of you teachers, biology teachers out there, this could be a good good dissection lesson for you. Now, one thing that we do save, like I said earlier, is the livers, especially if they look good, which these are a nice deep dark color, if you can see. But right on the end of this is the gallbladder, which you got to separate that, because if you don't and leave that in, the juices in it will just make everything taste sour. So I'm careful as I pull the livers off of that. And since we save them, I put the livers over here in our cold tank. All right.
One thing I'll say about the eviscerating process too is most of the time in conventional farming with these huge processing plants, and by the way, that has become more and more consolidated. So in the US, there's just very few processing plants, which means that, you know, you've got to travel farther, which puts stress on the birds, which causes the meat to be tougher. So there's a lot of benefits of processing on farm. But one of those is in those huge processing plants, most of the time when they eviscerate the chicken, they use a vacuum. They don't do it by hand. So a lot of times that causes the intestines to burst open, and so all the contents will come out and actually contaminate the rest of the meat. And so that can cause, when they put the chicken into those they put them into vats like that to cool, it'll create this like fecal sludge on the bottom of those vats, and the chicken's just sitting in there. And so to disinfect it, then they'll dip the chicken into chlorine water, which is obviously not good for the consumer. And There was something else I was going to say about that, but I forgot.
Well, even to major processing plants are just a breeding ground for bacteria, especially since we're in the midst of this coronavirus thing, whatever you want to call it. A lot of the food shortages that have taken place across the country has nothing to do with us not having meat and us not having food. It has everything to do with processing plants shutting down and not being operational, because the people that are working in those processing plants that are in cool, damp environments, it just makes viruses and bacteria easy to spread, which can spread into food. So there's a worker shortage, meat that was contaminated, so they had to shut things down. So processing outside, open air, clean environment is obviously way better. And if you see, I'm processing one bird at a time on our table, okay? Which means there's no cross-contamination with other birds. Because I do everything by hand and taking the intestines out, I'm careful enough to make sure that no internal organs or intestines are broken, which would contaminate the meat. So everything about this is 100 times cleaner than a regular processing plant, and we never have to use chlorine. We never have to contaminate our meat with bleach and chlorine to kill things, because it's naturally clean.
Yeah, it's always a lot easier to keep a small processing facility clean than one of these huge processing facilities that's processing, thousands or tens of thousands of birds in one day.
All right, so what I'm doing now, I've got all the organs out, which really, in terms of eviscerating, cleaning all that stuff out. The hardest part about it really is getting the crop out at the beginning, and then the lungs are kind of stuck to the rib cage wall, so you kind of have to scrape those out a little bit. But and that's what Emily was talking about in terms of everything just being vacuum sucked out. Creates a mess. And when I do things by hand, I'm picky about getting things to a certain standard for me.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to do quality control when you're doing it by hand.
Because I clean every bird as if it was one that I was going to feed my daughters. So I'm going to do a thorough job and make sure everything's done. Now, it may take us a little bit longer, but I do things the right way. Now, with this bird, if we were going to do a whole bird, package them up, we would stop right here, put it in the cooling tank bring the body temperature down. But this one we're actually going to part out. So I'll kind of go through the process too of how to part out a bird if you ever want to do this, okay? To start with, I'm going to do the leg quarters. So I'll take my knife, I'm going to cut down the skin here on both sides. All right, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to dislocate the legs. Now, normally too, before I do this, I have the birds, soaking for a while. But for the sake of our video, I want to show this to you. Now, when we cut these leg quarters off, it's almost going to look like a bow tie here on the back as I cut. So I'm going to kind of let gravity do its thing, and I'm going to cut right along the back end here. I'm going to go right behind this leg quarter bone and cut it off there. So that's your typical leg quarter that you would see in the store. All right, do the same thing on the other side. You'll be able to see this side a little bit better. I'll cut right along the bottom, right in between those bones that I dislocated. Another leg quarter. So there's your leg quarters. All right. Now the hardest thing for me is doing the wings sometimes, finding those joints. So I kind of go back behind the shoulder and between the neck first, then come around to the front until I can find the actual joint. Once I find the joint, then I can cut in between, because I want to keep as much meat on there as possible. There's one wing.
You forgot to mention the first rule of processing.
Oh, yeah. And it's another reason why I'm wearing sunglasses too. I heard this, I can't remember where I heard it from, but it's very true. The number one rule of processing is if at any point anything splashes onto your face or your lip, don't lick it.
Keep your mouth closed at all times.
That's why I'm wearing, even though the sun's not out today, I'm wearing sunglasses because of splashback.
And don't touch your face.
Yeah.
So.
All right, so there's the other wing. Now, for boneless, skinless breast, I'm gonna just put a small tear kind of in down here at the bottom of where this skin is. So I'm gonna do that. And then I'm just gonna pull this skin back.
Daddy?
Yes, ma'am?
It looks like
Beautiful.
straight line.
Yep, there is a straight line down the center of that breastbone. So there you go. You see the meat, which I have some jokes about this part of the process, but I'll spare you. It's probably not appropriate. But anyway, what I'll do is I'll then put a cut right at the top of where I took these wings off. I'll make sure I get around that bone, and then you can kind of see maybe there's like a natural line of fat along the bottom edge of what would be the top edge of the ribs. Once I get around that top bone, I'm gonna just follow that line of fat down with a cut, and then I'm just gonna start tearing and pulling. There's a couple little things to kind of get started, because I learned this as well. Even when surgeons are doing surgery, they don't do a whole lot of cuts. They do very minimal cutting. They do a lot of tearing. Because you're able to kind of keep more of the meat intact. So you can see I separated the breast from the rib cage wall there. I'm gonna cut around that a little bit more, and I'm gonna put a cut right between the breast and where this chicken tender is. Cut around this wishbone. Then I'm gonna hold it and kind of let gravity do some of the work too, and cut right down this breastbone. And you have a beautiful breast.
That is beautiful.
All right, then I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to, all right, Mary Cameron's gonna go see the horses now. Do the same thing, cut around that bone. Then I'm gonna follow this fat line down to the bottom. Then I'll start my pulling and tearing again.
While he's doing that, one thing I'll kind of add, if you're somebody that wants to eat pasture-raised, more pasture-raised meat, but you are concerned about the expense, because it is definitely more expensive. One trick is different cuts of meat. So the leg quarters here are going to be a whole lot cheaper than the breast. They're actually about half the price of the breast. Same with the wings. So wings are really cheap too. So you can still get the same quality meat, but just get a different cut of meat. It's a lot more affordable.
Okay.
Same too with buying a whole chicken. It's cheaper if you were to buy a whole chicken and part it out yourself. It's way cheaper than buying all the different pieces. So just a couple tricks there. And then of course, livers are extremely cheap, but they're very, very nutrient dense. They have a ton of iron, B12. So I know a lot of people are kind of afraid of organ meats, but there's actually a lot of benefits to organ meats, and they're typically very, very cheap.
All right, so both breasts are out. Then under here, which some people when cleaning birds, they kind of scoop the breast meat and the tenders out all at once, which in my opinion, you're missing out on some better cuts. So to get these chicken tenders out, I'm gonna go from the bottom of the breastbone I'm going to cut straight up that breastbone and kind of cross over where the wishbone is down the side. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Cut across, straight down, opposite side. And again, I'm going to be doing a lot of tearing. All right, I have to cut a little bit here. What you need, baby?
You can be in it in a second, okay?
She loves to be in videos. So I'm just pulling and tearing. Sometimes I have to cut up here towards the top, again, where it connects into that wing bone. Okay. Which I'm a little more careful with these tenders since it's a smaller cut. I don't want to rip them apart as I'm tearing, but
Sure you don't need to do a little more cutting?
yeah, I kind of messed up on that one. It's okay. I guess we'll keep this one. But still, all right. So you can still see chicken tender there. So we'll have to cut another one. I'll take that little piece of meat out too. All right, I'll see if I can do a little bit better job on this side. Okay. I'm gonna again start from the bottom and
Oh, my camera work's not great.
yeah, I can tell.
I'm working on it.
And some of this too, sometimes if you let the meat cool before doing this, it comes off the bones easier. But I wanted to kind of be able to show this to you all at one time. Because the tenders is really kind of the only thing that's really stuck the bone more. Alright, so pulled that off, and again, here's your tender. Okay, looks like what you get at Zaxby's. Now, so everything else is just kind of leftover meat and skin and the neck bones, and we don't waste these either. We package these up separately, 2 backs to a pack, because using these to make broths is incredible, and it will make a ton of great thick broth. Or if you like to do bone broths, which is also, you know, a huge part of, if you are part of the keto diets, paleo type stuff, this is foundational, okay, as far as nutrients and what you can get from this. So we package these up, and you can get these, and it's awesome.
And they're only $3 a pack for 2 bags, so.
And these birds are huge.
Yeah.
All right, so once we've cut everything up, since we package all of this, put it in the cooling tank. And what this cooling tank is a plastic trough that obviously I clean this before and after every time we process. So it's filled with water and full of ice to help chill the meat down and cure it to be ready for packaging. So now we're ready for our next bird, but is there anything else we want to talk about?
I don't think so. I think that was it.
Mary Cameron wants to say something in the video. What do you want to say?
Here.
Mary Cameron, what do you do to help us with the chickens?
Here, get in the video.
Yeah, she does check the eggs as far as the meat
The
chickens.
laying hens. She's about to get her own ducks for duck eggs. That's going to be her little business.
Yep.
So, you want to do what?
Now she's being shy. So, there you go. That's how you process a chicken all the way through. Kind of some reasoning behind why we do what we do and the way we do it. Takes a little bit of time, takes a little bit of practice too. We definitely takes us a little bit to do a batch at a time, but we're getting better. and I'd highly encourage you to give it a shot. And especially if you know folks who raise birds and process birds this way, give them your business, because this is the best quality bird you'll get. Obviously, being out on pasture, non-GMO feed, about as clean as you can get any of your food.
It's also a whole lot better for the environment and for the animals. So.
All right. Now, one thing I'll also show you really quick. I'll take this over if you want me to. All right, kind of as we end our processing, there's some things that we do to clean up. Obviously, we'll spray out and get feathers and stuff up, but our buckets that catch our blood from the kills, even our scalding water, all of that stuff, even over to our evisceration bucket that has our chicken innards and everything. All that goes to good use. We'll pull that over, and what I have been doing is the blood from the kills and processing. I've poured it straight into one of our fall garden areas. So this has been prepped with blood from our processing over the past month, and I've planted stuff in there. So I'll pour that directly onto our garden. I'll also use the innards and the other water and stuff to go onto our compost pile.
There's a snake under our porch.
Yes, there's a snake under our porch. So you can see I've kind of hollowed out a section of our compost pile. We'll pour the innards in there, cover it back up with the mulch, because we've got about 3 layers of processing days under here. And especially if you put a lot of fresh mulch over top of it, anything that's high in carbon keeps that smell down. And usually within the first week, especially if you have a big processing day, the smells goes away pretty quick. So everything we do has a purpose, has a place, and ends up turning around and helping us feed ourselves and make our gardens better. Again, it's all a part of that circle. So there you go. If y'all have any questions, put them in the comments. I'd love to answer any questions. If you have any tips, also always wanting to learn more. Otherwise, we'll see you in some of our next videos. Y'all have a good one.